Her name is Velvalee.
Velvalee is my new porn name, just so you know.
It is on.
Hi, everyone. Today, I'm back with everyone's second favorite media lesbian, Rachel Maddow. Actually, she's the first. I know. It's okay. I'll take it. We've got a lot to talk about from her new podcast about the issues around the World War II Japanese internment camps and the fire hose of news out of the Trump administration to Netflix and Paramount's bids to buy Warner Brothers. I love talking to Rachel. First of all, she's a history wonk, and she makes incredible parallels in this podcast series. I've listened to all that she's done, and they're really helpful to understand where we are today. They're also fascinating and bring up characters you didn't know existed who saved our republic in many ways. She also has very keen insights to where we are going in the news, and also the fact that we have identical haircuts is always, always a pleasure. As usual, this is sharp and fascinating, so stick around.
I was just talking about how sad my background is.
It is. What is happening? What is
So
my
we
God.
just moved. First of all, record this because you know
We
this is going to
are.
be this is going to
Oh.
be the best part of the
Yeah,
discussion.
you have no money? What's the heck?
We just moved into Versant headquarters.
Versant.
A
Like croissant, I've decided.
Nope.
Also good for rashes and
Yes,
other
ask your
skin
doctor
conditions. Ask your
about
doctor.
Versant. And new offices. First, I've been 17 years doing this show, and we've had, we were in Secaucus, and we've been different places and stuff, but it's been a long time since we moved. And so we're in these new places, and the biggest crisis is that, whenever you move to a new place, you need to figure out where you're getting your bacon, egg, and cheese.
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
And I have had like 4 failures in the new locale of the
No
office.
bacon, egg, and cheese? Really?
Well,
Not even?
no, but it's not right. Like it's not
Oh.
good. It's like tourist bacon, egg, and cheese. Like you need to find your place. It just takes me a while. And one of the things we haven't figured out apparently is where all our books are. Because look behind me, it's like a hurricane.
What books
came
are
through.
there? What's there?
Just like like a one copy of mine and like an old copy of an Ali
It's so
Velshi book. Like
sad.
my office is stacked chin deep in just piles of books.
Yeah.
But here, for my backdrop for talking to Kara Swisher, it's just like a flea market that was hit by a tornado.
Okay. All right. Well, I just love it. It's so sad.
It is. We're getting there.
Can't you
This-
get the Ellisons to give you some or something?
Oh God. Yeah,
know,
we don't.
we have
you know
things
what?
to talk
I'd
about.
rather live in the flea market hit by a tornado than live in billionaire chic. Sorry.
Okay. All right. I'm so excited. I love your podcast, I have to say. I'm loving
Oh,
it.
thank you for listening to it. I feel like you enjoy audio in a way that
I
that makes me
enjoy
happy.
your audio. I don't enjoy everyone's audio, let me just say. So we've got a lot to talk about. We'll start with your new podcast, Burn Order, I said. Then we'll get to some news items, including the Trump administration's lethal boat strikes, which you've been talking a lot about, America's new stance towards Europe, and Paramount's hostile bid for Warner Brothers Discovery in the light of Versant, which is like I like to call croissant. Do you like egg and
Versant-
cheese on a croissant?
Versant does make me feel snacky.
Doesn't it? Versant. Would you like
No, I
some
don't think there's anything Frenchy about us at all. I
flaky
think it's
Versant? It's
I
elite.
think it's Versant.
I know, but it's elite, and you want to be as elite. You want to lean into elite, Rachel. That's my feeling. It's coming back.
I'm like an Edina, Minnesota,
All right.
Savoy,
All
Massachusetts
right.
kind of. Yeah,
I think I'm
yeah.
correct about this. I'm a good branding person. Anyway, first, let me ask this. After covering the Trump administration every weeknight for the first 100 days, your show is back to Mondays. Given the ungodly amount of news happening, I just, how do you handle it just once a week?
Well, the good thing about doing the Monday show is that I get my choice of what to cover. Like, yes, it's a daily news show, and so I'm covering what happened on Monday, but I can also sort of take a little bit of a broader view of what's happened in the past week. And I think people are a little more forgiving in terms of not staying on the minute-to-minute headlines and instead widening the aperture a little bit. So I actually think it's a benefit for being just Monday.
How do you pick and choose?
We have this mantra on my show, which is to try to increase the amount of useful information in the world. And obviously it's a very clumsy
And long mantra.
It's
Yeah.
clumsy for a mantra and a long one,
Yeah.
but it's actually a very good guiding principle, and we use it all the time. We're explicit about it during the news meeting for every show. in the sense that there's not much use in me getting on the air and saying the same thing that everybody else has said, or presenting the same
Right.
information in the same context. So
Cable
it's,
can be repetitive. I don't know if you've noticed, or screamy.
and I just, it's not that I need to have like an original take. It's that we need to be, I think, rigorous in terms of what's the most useful thing to be expository about, to explain, to bring people's attention to. And sometimes that's new facts that haven't been noticed about a story that everybody's talking about. And sometimes it's a story that nobody's talking about.
Right. And do you tend towards one or the other? Because, things are so covered in such a, I would say, light but excessive way, if that makes sense, where you just don't, it's just repetitive, as I said, and a mile wide and a foot deep.
Yeah. I mean, I think if there's a pattern, that like a sort of discernible pattern in terms of what stories I pick, and how the show gets stacked. I think the thing that's maybe a little bit different about me is that I am not interested in Donald Trump. I reckon, like, it's very important who the American president is and what's happening to the country, and especially what he's trying to do to the country. But I don't care very much about what he says. I've always just sort of felt like he talks in a way that is designed to make the media jump. And I am just allergic to having anybody jerk me around like that. And so I watch what he does, but I'm not that interested in what he says.
I see. Like whatever crazy thing he spews, like "Hey Piggy" or whatever it happens to be.
I mean, if he says stuff that is materially important in terms of revealing something about what the administration is doing, or something that we need to understand about how he's changing the country, or something that's going to have consequences, fine. Words matter. But Donald Trump talking is not news, especially because he tries to make whatever the most recent thing he's burped out into a microphone, he tries to make that the news cycle. And I don't want him to program my show.
So one of the things that I like about your program and these podcasts is you're really wonky. Like, it's super wonky in a really lovely way. So your new podcast, Burn Order, is obviously a continuation of your narrative historical podcast, Ultra, which had 2 seasons, and the follow-up book, Prequel, which I actually listened to as if it was a podcast, because I think it sounds better. I know it sounds crazy, but it sounds good to hear them all together. Talk about why you picked the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II and the connection between what you were doing. And obviously we'll get to the connection of today, because everything you're doing has a connection to today.
Well, speaking of sort of nerding out a little bit, because you've listened to Ultra Season 1 and 2 and listened to Prequel as the audiobook, and I know that you're into this stuff, I feel like I can tell you a little bit of the backstory that actually didn't make it into the podcast, but is part of my thinking about it. So one of the kind of currents in Ultra, which is in some ways a thriller about Americans who were aligned with the Nazis, aligned with the Axis powers, are trying to organize that kind of a fascist movement here. There are paramilitary groups. They're, stealing weapons from U.S. military armories. They're doing a lot of really
Which
bad
is the
stuff.
continuing narrative throughout these.
Absolutely.
Right, these groups.
And you might remember that there's a spy named, or a spy master named Leon Lewis.
Yes.
Who gets World War I veterans, a lot of them German-American World War I veterans, to infiltrate these fascist groups and find out what they're doing. And he's amassing this incredible, like, scary detail about what they're doing, and nobody in law enforcement will take him seriously. The only people he can get to take him seriously, to receive his information and act on it, are naval intelligence.
Yeah. Right,
on the West Coast. You might remember that. So I followed that thread a little bit. And the naval intelligence officer that that Leon Lewis had success with when nobody else would listen to him was a guy named Ellis Zacharias. Ellis Zacharias turns out to be fascinating. He had a TV show on NBC at one point where he talked about his spy master exploits. He wrote a memoir that was incredible, that absolutely should be the basis for like a franchise series of movies in terms of all the stuff that he got into. And he spoke Japanese, which was a crazy detail. And why does he speak Japanese? That got me to Office of Naval Intelligence. and Zacharias and other people. And they ended up playing this really interesting, constructive, and ultimately foiled sort of role in trying to shape U.S. government policy toward Japanese Americans, both before World War II and then after. In a way that I think we sort of shorthand them like as we think of them as activists, like the analog to people like that today would be activists, but they're kind of more than that. They're these patriots that are operating really on the margins of what's okay when the government isn't doing the right thing. They ultimately force the government to do the right thing.
In this case, there's several. There's one, and I'm blanking on his name.
Edward Ennis.
Not Ennis, but he's the bad general, the bad colonel.
Oh, General John DeWitt and Colonel Carl Bendetson.
Yes, there's also villains, right, in terms of
for sure
of what it is, and then the doll lady, the one who was sending doll.
Velvalee Dickinson.
That's
her
my
name
favorite
is
name.
Velvalee.
Velvalee is my new porn name, just so you know.
I'll send you a picture.
Dickinson. I'll keep the whole thing.
There's a picture of her doll shop in New York City, and it says on like the canopy over the plate glass window, Velvalee Dickinson on it. I mean, it's crazy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, I mean that you find these people, but why Japanese Americans? It just led you here.
A lot has been written about Japanese American incarceration. A lot has been written about, FDR's moral failing here, and about Japanese Americans not only experience, but their like sort of incredible spirit and resilience and response to it and over generations. A lot has been written there. I don't know that anybody's written about the fact that the people who actually were spying for Japan were in large part white American fascists who liked Japan either because just they were paying or because Japan was arguably fascist the way that Germany and Italy were.
Right. They were part of those Axis powers.
Yeah. And so when I realized that the guy who was the architect of Japanese American incarceration is also the guy who wrote and signed the memo that said, yeah, let's, lock up all Japanese Americans, including the elderly and babies. But let's explicitly not lock up, not evacuate, not remove from the West Coast the silver shirts, the American fascists who have been
white fascists,
plotting to overthrow the U.S. government to ally us with Hitler.
Now, I assume that every country has spies from every country, and maybe people who are sympathetic to their cause, right? No matter where you are. And in this case, most of the villains were white people who were either, as you said, paid or part of the, they believed in what was happening here, versus Japanese Americans who were quite loyal to the United States.
The whole myth, the whole propaganda campaign that justified or gave the pretext for this incredibly radical thing that we did, 120,000 plus Japanese immigrants and Japanese Americans locked up for years, including, going and getting babies out of orphanages because they had some fraction of Japanese Japanese lineage.
Well, babies are well-known spies,
Yes, exactly. They're cute, so they can get in anywhere.
They are crafty, but anyway.
They just crawl right under.
Right.
But the whole propaganda pretext and justification for that was that Japanese Americans were on Japan's side, that they were treacherous. And U.S. naval intelligence, among others, not only learned that that was not true, but sort of proved that that was not true, in part by accessing the Japanese government's own files in which they had lists of their spies and assets and their explicit lamentations that they couldn't get any Japanese Americans
to do it. So,
on their side.
As in most stories, there are three main characters: the villains, the victims, and the heroes, essentially. And the villain is clearly this Carl Bendetson, the man who came up with this plan, a military person. The victims, obviously, are Japanese Americans who were incarcerated with no due process. Heroes are people like Ken Ringel.
And the Japanese Americans themselves who challenged it when nobody would help them.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, but you begin the story by talking about, is it Aiko Herzig Yoshinaga, right?
Good job. Yes,
Thank you.
Exactly. Yeah.
And she's a woman who spent years at the National Archives researching this time in American history, found the document that was supposed to have been destroyed, outlining what Carl did, essentially. Talk a little bit about the faith in these sort of misdeeds coming out in the end. The bad guys get their due, and America will ultimately find out what's right, especially for listeners who right now feel that there are a lot of burn orders happening right now, right? But talk about her for a minute and how random it was that she found this. Like, it could have stayed, you know, gone, essentially rosebudded, burnt up. We never know what it was. So talk about her a little bit.
Yeah. And thank you for zooming in on this. I think this is a really important part of it. I mean, I think that when the government does really bad things, when like radical people inside the government get the country to follow their radical vision and do something that is really plainly beyond the pale in terms
Yeah.
of what our
Oh,
Constitution is
no, we're
supposed
all
to allow.
excited about Stephen Miller's emails, but go ahead.
Yeah.
If he
I
doesn't
think that
destroy
what
them.
they're counting on is that they will, in forcing the country to do something so radical, they'll kind of win people over to the idea that this was a good idea, and it will start to seem like this was an inevitable policy. This is something that happened sort of with its own inertia in its own way, and they'll never be called out as the agent who made it happen. And actually, I think even in our modern conception about Japanese American incarceration, we think of it as something that just happened, almost like not that it was inevitable, but that it was going to we were going to make our way there to that policy as a country without anybody having to steer it that way. No,
Right.
there were people who had to steer it that way. And there's reasons that it happened, and there's, systemic stuff going on, but you have
Mhm.
to have agents within the government who make
Mhm.
it happen. And what
And
Aiko
also
heard,
put out false news like DeWitt did. There was always an attack in San Francisco that wasn't happening. And of course, people are nervous because there was an attack. So they think there's someone behind every tree, essentially.
oh, yeah. And I mean, in the wake of Pearl Harbor, I mean, the Pearl Harbor attack was absolutely devastating. I mean, destroyed the Pacific Fleet, decimated the Pacific Fleet, killed more than 2,000 Americans, a real surprise attack. The Navy secretary came out after Pearl Harbor and said definitively, as if he knew, that there had been fifth columnists in Hawaii that made it happen, which absolutely was not true.
Mhm.
There were journalists and politicians and special interest groups all over the West Coast who were inveighing against the Japanese as if it was just, some received truth that Japanese Americans had been treacherous when they hadn't. And so you've got people who have to make the propaganda happen, but then you've also got people who have to conceive the policy, plan it, and implement it. And at this point, when Aiko Herzog Yoshinaga is in the archives, it's decades after the policy was developed. It's decades after she herself was incarcerated along with her family. She gave birth in the camps.
Mhm.
She finds essentially a path back to the origin. She
Mhm.
finds the documents that prove not only who orchestrated it, who architected it, who designed the policy, but why he said he did it. And the reason that was a huge bombshell, including in court, is because the Army knew that what he admitted about why he did it showed so plainly that it was unconstitutional. This is Carl Bendetson, that had the Supreme Court actually seen his explanation of why he did the policy, there's very little chance that it would have survived scrutiny, even at the time, even when it was in court in 1943 and 1944. So they had burned the evidence of what they'd done. And Aiko found the last copy of what was
Because they
supposed to
knew
have
it
been
was
burned.
wrong when how they did it. And Carl thought this was the right thing, right? He thought they are in fact dangerous, correct? Would you say that or not? He knew they weren't.
I don't know. I mean, listen, I think that
I'm saying he thought it wasn't the right thing. He thought he was doing the right thing. Or
I
why else
think
do it?
he designed a policy to incarcerate not just Japanese immigrants, but Japanese American citizens by the tens of thousands. He devised this policy under General DeWitt's name. General DeWitt was kind of
Seemed to be losing it.
just not an impressive character.
Mhm.
Bendetson was very impressive.
Mhm.
He got in there as Ken Ringle's son tells us in his interview. He realized he was in sort of a power vacuum. He had the opportunity to take something over, and then what he designed was this incredibly radical, indefinite mass incarceration policy where he would be in charge of it. So he made the U.S. government do something that's absolutely unbelievable. Like you can't believe that
Sounds
this happened
familiar.
in the 20th century. But it's a policy that took a lot of work and a lot of administration and a lot of logistical. And he ran it himself.
But does
And
that sound familiar to
yeah,
Stephen
I mean,
Miller, correct?
yeah.
I kept hearing echoes of that, like
Yes,
how he
and-
moved into a policy vacuum and a power vacuum, really.
And he's the man behind the man, right? The guy who's in charge, General DeWitt, is very prejudiced and very volatile and has lots of connections with politicians and all this stuff, but is kind of a buffoon. And Stephen Miller, Carl Bendetson, is not. Knows what he's doing and has a very radical vision for what he wants to do. But it's not like he does it because I do not think there's any evidence that he had a good faith belief that Japanese Americans were committing sabotage or were spies. There was no basis for that. And the FBI was saying so, and military intelligence was saying so. His own office was being informed of that. They had this whole thing where they were sure to ship communications, radio communications. And the FCC at the time, the nascent FCC, comes in at the time and is like, you don't know how to read the instruments you're using. Like you're describing stuff that absolutely, not only is it not Japanese Americans who are doing it, but the thing you're describing is not happening. You don't understand how to do this stuff. They knew it was all made up, and yet they kept citing it as the pretext to do this radical and profoundly racist thing.
But that said, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed the executive order that kicked out the internment. The Attorney General of California and then Governor of the state, Earl Warren, was one of the driving forces behind the policy. Warren obviously then went on to become Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And both were lions of the American progressive movement and also architects of one of the most racist policies of the past century. Should their legacies be more tainted than what they are in the eyes of the general public? Because it didn't just take this guy. It's easy to say, like Miller, right?
Oh, yeah. And for Warren in particular, he wasn't just somebody who went along with it. Warren made it happen in a lot of ways. I mean, Warren created, for his own, I think, political benefit, the clamor in California politics that really fueled it. And so, yeah, Warren has a lot to answer for. And Warren, it haunted Warren his whole life. I mean, for everything else that Earl Warren ever did, he had a monstrously terrible and racist role in this chapter in U.S. history, and he knew it. He knew it. It did haunt him for all his days. And with FDR, that was a man who, his legacy at this in terms of what he was trying to do in preparing the United States for war and then leading us in war once Pearl Harbor happened. Obviously, a man with a lot on his plate, but boy, did he fail on this. He essentially just checked out. His wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, was very much against this happening. She had sort of Confederates in the White House on her side trying to maneuver her husband away from this, or at least to speak up for Japanese Americans to protect them from sort of vigilante violence, just to do something. And he just checked out. He said, he said, whatever it's going to be, if it's military necessity, you have carte blanche. The only thing he said was, and I quote, be as reasonable as you can. That's what he told the authorities when he gave them the authority
when
to
Eleanor
do this.
Confronted FDR about it, he told her never to bring it up again.
That's right. Yeah, he absolutely failed on that. It was a moral failing on this. And it was sort of an abdication of responsibility on this. Like, this is just something he didn't want to think about, didn't want to deal with, and therefore one of the worst civil liberties and humanitarian catastrophes in our history. Stains his legacy forever.
So every episode we get an expert to send us a question. Yours comes from Caitlin Dickerson, a staff writer for The Atlantic, who covers immigration. Let's hear it.
Hi, Rachel. Thanks for the podcast. I'm really enjoying it. And I want to say shout out to Aiko Herzig Yoshinaga. I don't know where her story ends, but I too have toiled in the National Archives for very long stretches of time. And I know what it's like to dig through that surprisingly disorganized set of documents and also to come upon finally the thing that you were looking for, or even better, as in her case, something you didn't know was there, but that turns out to be even more important than what you had in mind. So it was really hard for me to come up with just one question for you, but I have. We're in another moment now of very controversial policies that are targeting immigrants and, in some cases, their descendants. Some of those policies rooted in race-based stereotypes and fear-mongering. And I'm getting a lot of questions from people about what to do, how to feel, and what to do. And so I'm wondering, listening to your show, and maybe you'll get to it, how did the general public respond to the internment of Japanese Americans as it was happening? We were in the middle of a war, so the context was quite different, but did people generally have a strong reaction to that policy if they weren't personally impacted by it? Or did they sort of continue with daily life? What did they do? And what lessons are there for us now in that response? Thanks.
First of all, good on you for getting Caitlin
Well, I
Dickerson.
like to
Isn't she
get yes,
fantastic?
I think she's amazing. I like to
Yeah.
special things for you, Rachel. Only
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Great question. And this is a sort of a part of this story that I think really haunts my thinking about it now because um, there was no mass protest by non-Japanese Americans against what happened to Japanese Americans. There was when people were being taken out of their homes and put in assembly centers, right? And forced to report, given a number, forced onto trains or buses, taken to what were, prison camps. FDR called them concentration camps. Americans in their neighborhoods who were not Japanese stood by and watched it happen. Literally watched the buses and the trains take off. And that, I think, is part of the moral legacy here. There is, it's sort of the whole back half of the podcast deals with this in detail. But the few people that did stand up outside the Japanese American community, I think, had to be singular kind of people. Like, it's interesting, some of the white lawyers who were involved in these cases were real eccentrics or people who are not part of the establishment at all. I think that's important. You need people who got outside of groupthink. So the general public response was muted. One thing that does emerge, though, and this is something that I didn't expect before getting into our interviews and getting into our story, is that even when there weren't protests, the few people who just tried to materially help, who, like, for example, there's a scene in episode 3 where this group of Quaker women used to come to the fence of one of the camps and throw over fresh fruits and vegetables. One of our interviewees, her mom was pregnant at the time, and a Quaker woman saw that she was pregnant and brought a homemade quilt, brought a blanket, and threw the blanket over the fence to her and said, "I hope this will help." And our interviewee, Satsuki Ina, her mom kept that blanket until literally her deathbed. And because of what it meant to her to be betrayed by her country, to be betrayed by their white neighbors, to be betrayed by all the people who they thought were their compatriots, but to have this little spark of people trying to help just to mitigate the harm. Those Quaker women at the fence weren't stopping the policy, but they were recognizing the humanity of the people who were being hurt by it. And that itself is a form of moral defiance. And to me, that makes me think about not just faith communities now, but everybody who's doing things just to materially help the people
Like
who are
women
being targeted
taping
by
it or
Trump.
yelling at police or getting in the way or even
Yeah, I mean, that's trying to stop what the Trump administration and its agents are doing. But also just mutual aid, just trying to help people, getting groceries for families that are in hiding, turning up at the gate. So you mean seeing the Catholic mobilization in Chicago of trying to bring the Eucharist, trying to do a Catholic rites at the Broadview
right up
facility.
to the Pope, right? The Pope has been very outspoken about the
Yeah.
topic. One of the most striking things about listening to Burn Order is how tens of thousands of American citizens had their constitutional rights stripped away from them instantly. Now, more than 80 years later, the Supreme Court has basically legalized racial profiling by immigration agents, so-called Kavanaugh stops. Particularly, American citizens are being detained, American citizens, by ICE agents. ProPublica has documented over 170 cases of Americans being detained by immigration agents. More than 20 cases, they were jailed for over 24 hours and weren't allowed to call family member or lawyer. So talk about these exceptions to constitutional protections becoming the norm, because we sit there and go, I can't believe they did this, but they're doing it.
Yeah. And, and I think that to focus on who exactly they did it to, you have to a certain extent, because you have to pay attention to, who was targeted and how. I think you also have to just look at how they're doing it. I mean, citing the Alien Enemies Act, right? Like we saw. Why were they trying to use the Alien Enemies Act against people from Venezuela? Not because of anything there was no war with Venezuela then, and there's still none now, but they wanted to use the powers that the Alien Enemies Act gave them to essentially operate outside the bounds of the Constitution. Like, oh, right, okay. Denaturalization, right? They're talking about getting rid of people who are naturalized citizens are people who are not born in this country, who got their citizenship after birth. They want to denaturalize and take away citizenship from those kinds of Americans. They talked about doing the same thing to Japanese Americans.
Right.
Now they're talking about trying to get rid of birthright citizenship.
Right. Well, I was just going to note the Supreme Court has taken up the case challenging birthright citizenship. That in and of itself can be seen as a victory for Trump that they're even taking it up. And the court could uphold birthright citizenship, but still chip away at it. They love to chip away or open door its reinterpretation by Congress. That leads to the larger question, who is going to ultimately get to decide who belongs in America, right? I think that's what your podcast is about, too. Will it be ICE, Trump, Congress, Supreme Court? Was it FDR? Was it like it's the same? It feels so resonant to what's happening now, which is why didn't we learn from them, and what were the excuses they used then that are similar to today?
Yeah, it's about this idea. The authoritarian project is, right, I want to be able to exclude and abuse, incarcerate, potentially kill. I want to have zero accountability for my actions toward certain people who I want not to be American. Right. And once you're down that road, it's just a question of how far you're going to go. But once that's the framing with which you are approaching this, we're going to say that, you're alien enemies. You're not just immigrants. You're enemies to us, right? So therefore, essentially, we can treat you as if you are a combatant. We are going to take away your citizenship. We are going to say, even though you were born here, you're not the right kind of American. I mean, Trump is talking about stripping citizenship from people who he deems to be incompatible with Western civilization.
That would be you and I, but go ahead.
Yes, that would be anybody who he chooses to apply that to. Like, don't think, oh, I don't look like that kind of person. That'll be in his eyes. And so once you're in that kind of a project, the only question is how far you can go before you're stopped. And with Japanese American incarceration, where we ended up, in part because of people like Aiko Herzog Yoshinaga and what she did, and because of the Japanese Americans who challenged it, and because of people who stuck with it decades later to try to make sure that legal foundation didn't survive to a new generation of leaders who would try to do this for some reason, is that we ended up overturning the convictions in the Japanese American incarceration test cases. Those convictions were overturned. The Supreme Court finally acknowledged that Korematsu was wrongly decided. But more than that, the U.S. government formally apologized for it and paid reparations payments to the survivors. While presidents as radical and liberal and socialist as Ronald Reagan said this was a wrong and we will never do it again as a country. We supposedly learned this lesson and committed that we'd never do anything like it again. And we should relearn those lessons and remind ourselves.
We haven't, right? I mean, obviously.
I don't think.
Is it
I
the
think,
same tactics? I mean, we're talk about the echoes between them, because let me just say, a few days ago, Amnesty International released a report alleging human rights violations and torture at so-called Alligator Alcatraz detention facility in Florida and the Crone Detention Center, the ICE detention facility that's also in Florida. The report is shocking, but to give you a small glimpse of what's in it, at Alligator Alcatraz, detainees have described as being put into a small cage-like structure for hours. It's approximately 2 by 2 feet. Their hands and feet are restrained while they're in it. So let's take Caitlin's question is, how is the Democratic Party and general public reacting to these deliberately cruel and degrading treatment of immigrants, which happened before? Like, this never again thing is, oh, maybe again.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the elite and institutional response is woefully inadequate. I think that there is something going on sort of in the heart of the American people that people are responding. I mean, there have been a lot of protests at Chrome. There have been protests at the Everglades facility, the so-called Alligator Alcatraz. I imagine that this Amnesty report about putting people in this 2-foot-tall cage outside in the swamp will touch some more people's hearts, and people will respond the way that I think Americans have been responding to these sort of outrages. But expecting the Democratic Party to lead on this is something that I've given up on. I expect the American people to lead on
Which
it, and
didn't
then
happen then, right?
Democrats to follow the crowd.
Right.
No, there wasn't. There really wasn't. I mean, the Roosevelt administration sort of soured on mass incarceration of Japanese Americans a couple years into it.
Mhm.
By the time the test cases were getting to the Supreme Court,
Mhm.
in 43 and 44, within the administration, they were realizing like, oh, we got to unwind this somehow.
Right.
But once you've worked people up into a racist frenzy for needing to do something, it's kind of hard to unwind that.
Right.
And so they had to be stopped. Mitsuya Endo's case is actually one of the 4 Japanese American test cases that succeeded and coincided with the closing of the camps. But yeah, I mean, we're in a position right now where ultimately the people who did this will either be held accountable or, like Carl Bendetzen and the other sort of bad guys in this story, they will spend the rest of their days denying it was them and pretending they had nothing to
Right.
do with it.
Well, let's get to that. Well, let's change and talk about both our foreign policy and what you have in burn order. They centers around the report that was supposed to remain secret that ICO found in the boat strike saga. There's also a classified document. There's also video. But in this case, it does the opposite. There's apparently a memo from the DOJ's Office of Legal Counsel that lays out the rationale for launching military strikes against alleged drug runners. According to reports, it claims that cartels using profits from drugs to attack allies like Mexico, and since air strikes are targeting the drugs, any deaths are justified. This is what the administration has relied on when orders of killing civilians. And are we watching another moment like this when people inside the government and military rely on flimsy legal cover in order to carry out what are essentially illegal orders, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And which
Yeah.
happened here, it seems like. It happened here and also back then.
Yeah, the really direct parallel is that the Justice Department was fighting against the incarceration policy, and nobody in the Justice Department would write a legal opinion saying it was legal because it was clearly illegal. And so they found other government lawyers outside the Justice Department to write a memo saying, okay, it was legal. And
Right.
those lawyers actually talk about sort of liberal alliance, talk about Earl Warren and FDR and their legacy. The 3 lawyers who wrote the memo that greenlit this are all like, New Dealer, liberal,
right.
real establishment
Right.
lawyers. And all of them, for the ends of their days, spent swinging between apologizing for and denying their responsibility for what they did. And I do think that it's worth, we as American citizens and observers of what's going on, we're going to have to answer for what we did and whether or not we did anything to try to stop these sort of terrors, and whether or not we made sure they were documented, and whether or not we spoke out against them, whether or not we knew that was going to affect. It was going to be effective to stop them. Did you actually object? It matters if you object. But the people who enabled this stuff, people who are working in the regime right now that is terrorizing people on the basis of race explicitly, they're going to have to answer for it. And they may have to answer for it just to their own families and to God. But if we do this right, they're going to have to answer in court as well. And they should know that. And they should act accordingly.
So when we're talking about these boat strikes in the same way, in recent days, there's a lot of focus on the second strike that reportedly killed 2 men as they held onto the floating wreckage and whether or not it was a war crime. But as Charlie Savage and Julian Barnes pointed out in the Times, focusing on the details of the second strike might actually play to Trump's advantage because it implicitly accepts the premise that these strikes are part of a war, not simply cold-blooded murder. And as you pointed out, the attacks are so obviously illegal that our historic allies and partners in Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance have withheld information from us. Is the fervor over the second strike missing the point?
Yeah, and I'm glad you pointed out that that Charlie Savage piece, because I think he also makes one very clear, very memorable point that I hope people take away from that article, which is, imagine an American cop on the beat who sees a drug deal happen, who sees somebody buy, a bag of weed or some coke or something. In seeing that happen, can the cop in that instance draw his or her firearm, walk up to the person who he or she thinks did the drug deal and just shoot him in the head?
Mm-hmm.
Is that how we're dealing with drug problems in our country? Like, if you think there's a meth lab in your rural community, can the sheriff in your county roll up and just machine gun the house in which he suspects there might be a meth lab there. And if people run out, shoot them. And if people are surviving, laying on the ground, have sheriff's deputies walk up and instead double tap them, shoot them in the forehead twice to make sure they're dead. I mean, like, is that what we're doing? Because there's nothing that makes it more legal to do that in water than it would be to do that on a street corner in the United States. And there's nothing about the language and the memos that they've generated around what they're doing in the Caribbean that makes it any more legal than that. And that is not, it's just not what we do. And it's not a war. And this isn't, interception of drug boats, like this isn't law enforcement. This isn't war. This is just illegal murder.
No, it's a bad Sylvester Stallone movie. That's what it feels like, essentially.
Well, yeah, but what they like about it is the movie aspect of it, right? Like what they like is how it looks on TikTok. And Trump likes sitting in the Oval Office and saying, "We will kill you, we will kill you, we will kill you." Well, if we started killing everybody suspected of having anything to do with drugs, lots of people who the president knows are going to have a lot of problems. It's not legal and it's not right. And ultimately, they're going to be held accountable for it. I think Trump is pretty sure he's not going to be held accountable for anything. But people in the U.S. military who are following through with these plainly illegal orders, it will haunt them and their careers and their lives the whole rest of their lives. And it's not fair to put them in this position.
So one of the things that's interesting about the podcast and the echoes of today is that these people were haunted most of their lives for what they did, right? One of the things I was thinking, I was talking to someone about it and said, "Oh, should we kick people when they're dead?" I'm like, quite a bit. We should kick them when they're dead. Yes. Let's keep kicking the corpses of Carl and the rest of them.
Well, look at how their lives turned out when they had to drag this moral albatross with them, wait till you get to episode 6 and you find out the way things worked out.
I love
what
happened. I love the what happened thing.
Yeah, we've got Carl in a way that you're not going to expect.
But when you decided to do this, is this your goal in pointing that out to today's people? It's like, I keep thinking, Kristi Noem, you're going to jail. You're eventually, Pete Hegseth, you're in big trouble. Or I don't think Trump will be held accountable, actually, right?
Yeah.
So what was your goal here when you think about doing burn order? And the only reason it got surfaced is because of this one lady who just came upon a document, right? Like, that's how random it was.
Yeah, it's both of it. It's both to make the people who are doing wrong recognize that they should change course now while they still can, because otherwise this is going, among all the other things that this is and all the other pain that this causes, they're going to ruin their own lives and they're going to cause generational harm to their own families by being part of something that is so obviously wrong that we will dissect this and we will dissect this and get to the bottom of this, and nobody who is doing wrong on these scores will ever be let off for them. And so if you're breaking people's windows and dragging women out of daycares and locking up U.S. citizens because you racially profiled them and thought that they looked like immigrants even if they weren't, and you're locking up immigrants and calling them murderers and rapists when they've got no criminal record, and you're doing that by the tens of thousands, and you're putting people in cages and swamps to punish them because you enjoy the torture. If you're part of any of those things, you are ruining your own life and your family's life for multiple generations to do this. And think about it. You can get out now. But also on the good side of it, like, the ways to fight these things are myriad. And some of them are about helping people now. A lot of this is about saying no and objecting and protesting and confronting people with the moral wrong of what they're doing. We also, frankly, need a lot more lawsuits. We need a better legal defense in this country than we're getting. And that was Trump's triumph, I think, in going after the craven but powerful rich law firms early on, is that they haven't joined in to help people bring a legal offensive here that might slow this stuff further. And those, white shoe law firms, the Paul Weisses of the world, and all those other law firms that sign those deals, they need to unwind those deals and start working on the right side of history here, or they themselves are going to be paying for it forever.
Right. And on this topic, the last thing, the Japanese Americans, the people that survive, what echoes of what happened to them having their constitutional rights. Do you see any parallels to today, what might happen to these people who have been so badly victimized by these mass deportations comparatively?
Oh, yeah. The harm here is real. You can't You can't lock up more than 100,000 people for years. I mean, some of the ways we locked up Japanese Americans, we locked them up in whole families locked up in horse stalls, through the winter and for months at a time, living in, with military style group latrines for pregnant women and elderly people and substandard food. And I mean, taking babies out of orphanages and putting them in prison camp orphanages on the basis of their race. I mean, yeah, the multi-generational harm there is something that I don't have the words for, honestly. I will also say that there's been a lot of Japanese American leadership against what Trump is doing to immigrants now. And that's also that when we get around to Carl at the end of Burn Order, you're also going to learn a little bit more about that too.
Wow, I can't wait. I hope he gets thrown into the sea. Before we go, I want to finish up talking in just a few more minutes about the Warner Brothers Discovery Netflix deal, the hostile takeover by possibly bid by Paramount. We could spend multiple episodes talking about this. This is where things stand as we record on Tuesday morning. After Warner Brothers Discovery Board chose Netflix bid, Trump said it would be a problem that it would be involved in the decision to approve or reject the merger. He also called Ted Sarandos, the CEO of Netflix, fantastic. David Ellison's Paramount launched a hostile takeover bid, but not before reporting meeting with Trump and telling him Paramount would make sweeping changes to CNN if they bought Warner. Trump also said, I never met these people, essentially. He did one of those. They're not really friends of mine, which I loved. I was like, chef's kiss, Trump. Let's leave aside the movie business and focus on news. Ellison is remaking CBS News in Trump's image, really. How do you describe, because right now you're in a situation where you're all remaking a news company with you at the center of it, Rachel. You are the queen bee, I guess. I don't know what. Okay.
Monday nights at 9. Come on, Carol. Let's not overstate things.
I'm going to overstate it because I can tell what they're doing, obviously. Talk about the knock-on effects right now for media in general and this particular deal. And let's imagine, for whatever reason, you were looking for a new TV home. Would you consider working at the David Ellison-owned CNN, for example? By the way, I just publicly stated I will not work a day for them, but go ahead. I just said,
could you imagine? Yeah, let's have.
I'll be over with you people at Versailles in a very short order.
My interview with Barry Weiss.
Yeah, that would be really good. That would be a lesbian face-off I don't want to be part of. But so talk about that, like what's happening there.
Yeah, I mean, I think let's go right to the bottom line here. Donald Trump right now is minus 24 in his approval rating, right? And those polls were done before he started talking about Somali people as garbage and saying that he's going to take away citizenship from Americans who he deems to be incompatible with Western civilization. I'm sorry. If you run a multi-billion-dollar enterprise and your big strategic decision is like, how can I get right with that guy?
Right.
I don't respect your acumen. I don't expect your vision. I mean, he's 79 years old. He lives on cheeseburgers. I don't know what's going on with the hand, but it's not good. I don't know what's going on with the ankles, but it's not good. He's not going to be there for that long. And his legacy is going to be an oil slick on the bottom of the American, on the bottom of our founding documents. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, did this fall into something? What's this smear here? Like the idea that you are positioning your company and your, family empire for a legacy in which it all comes down to you destroyed something of value, something that contributes to who we are as a country, to instead please the guy who will go down as the worst American in multiple generations, certainly the worst president we ever had, the man who tried to destroy this country and got pretty far down the road to doing it. I don't think you're right. I don't think you're making a good decision.
Right.
And I do think that the people who, plighted their troth with Trump right after the election because he won the election, now, 1 year into it, I think are in a moment where maybe it's time to reevaluate some of those decisions that you made. Maybe you were wrong to plight your troth with him. Maybe this isn't something you want to be associated with forever. Maybe, you should unwind those deals. Maybe you should stop kowtowing to him. Maybe you should get right with history, because I don't think his legacy is the one that you want to be intertwined with when you have to answer for who you are.
So 2 more very quick questions I have to ask about. With MS Now, your ratings are up since the rebrand. They're significantly up year over year. You have the highest rated show on the network. I don't care if you don't think you are the most important, but you are. The cable television is still shrinking. How do you look at it? How do you stay relevant when you think about where you are right now? It's a good start. What's the opportunity for something like MS Now?
I was stressed about, decoupling with NBC News because, I've always really integrated, like I use a lot of NBC News archives. I've always used a lot of NBC reporting and reporters and correspondents. And I've always had a really good relationship with the news side. So sort of us splitting off from them, I was anxious about it. But it turns out the way we've split off has been really good. We've hired all these new reporters, this whole new editorial structure. It means that all of our news gathering apparatus all works just for us, and we don't have to share with another company that honestly has different priorities and different interests. And so we're better actually than we were in the old structure under NBC Universal, and that feels good. That feels like a great place from which to grow. Also, we're doing better, I think, in terms of the way we digitally distribute what we do. Our online presence, I would put up against any other
you're doing great,
news entity in terms of how we're doing on YouTube and TikTok and places like that. We're strong in the podcast space and getting stronger and doing all different kinds of podcasts. So I think that actually we're in good shape. I'd rather be us than be anybody else in the news business right now.
I would agree.
Especially with the shame and I think the shame and sort of grubbiness of being part of one of these companies that's trying to please Trump. I mean,
shame and grubbiness. That's a good podcast. So on the last question, 80 years from now, when someone makes a podcast about the Trump era, maybe you, what'll it be called? And we know who the villains and victims are, so who are the heroes?
Shame and grubbiness, I think, actually is a pretty...
Oily.
We should buy the URL right now. We should buy the IP. Shame and grubbiness with Kara and Rachel.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I'll be coming over to Versant soon if the Ellisons get their grubby hands on.
Please.
I'm coming. I already talked to Rebecca. I told, I already said it publicly. There's not a millisecond I'll work for these people, just so you know.
What do you want to do at Versant? How would you do it?
Versant? I want to create a croissant business and say Versant croissants with you, and I want to wear outfits. And we can roll them, lesbian bakery kind of thing. I think
we can also mass market our haircut.
Yes, our haircut. There's so much to happen. There's so much. We can create a lesbian action movie. Obviously, as you know from cable these days, between Pluribus and The Beast in Me, dyspeptic lesbians are the thing for 2026. So I feel really good about
run with
future.
This now.
I know.
Sure.
I've tried, Rachel. I've tried. You just reject me at all efforts to do so.
We're gonna. I think that we're in good shape. I think that we should. You and I, and you and MS Now, we should be in cahoots more than we are.
Cahoots.
And I think that everybody who's working to try to make our country not just protect what they're trying to destroy, but who is trying to stand up for the people who they're trying to hurt along the way, gets a starring role in the 80 Years Hence podcast.
All right. Then here's to Shame and Grubby. Thank you, Rachel. As always, it's a wonderful podcast. Everyone should listen to it. Burn Order. And Aiko, thank God for you.
That's all seriously, man. Thank you, Kara.
Today's show was produced by Christian Castro-Russell, Kateri Yoakum, Michelle Alloy, Megan Burney, and Kaylin Lynch. Nishat Kurwa is Vox Media's executive producer of podcasts. Special thanks to Corinne Ruff and Andrea Lopez Cruzado. And our theme music is by Trackademics. If you're already following the show, you get to be a hero on our upcoming podcast, Shame and Grubbiness. If not, you get to work for the Ellisons. Thanks for watching. See you on Monday.